Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Dr. Carolyn Coker-Ross Show. I'm here today with Dr. Kristin Kirkpatrick. Kristin is a dietitian and consultant at the Cleveland Clinic Wellness Institute in Cleveland, Ohio. She's a best-selling author, speaker, and an award-winning dietitian. She's been seen on a number of local and national TV shows, including The Today Show, NBC Nightly News, and The Dr. Oz Show. As well, she has been, as well, she's been published in a number of national magazines such as the New York Times and Oprah. The Huffington Post named Kristin one of 35 diet and nutrition experts you need to follow on Twitter. In December of 2017, Kristin's show, The New Rules of Food, aired nationally on PBS and received rave reviews. And in January 2017, she published her first book called Skinny Liver, a proven program to prevent and reverse the new silent epidemic, fatty liver disease. That's a mouthful, Kristin.
Yeah.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's an honor and privilege to be with you today. Thank you.
Yeah. So you wrote a book about fatty liver, but I think today we're going to be talking more about the connection between food and mood.
Yeah.
And how the gut is involved in all of that.
Yep.
So tell me a little bit about what kinds of things you've learned about this connection.
Sure. Well, Carolyn, as you probably know, I am a senior fellow for the Meadows out in Arizona, and it's probably one of the proudest roles that I've ever had in my career as a dietitian. And the reason for that is because the connection with mental health and diets has been really under the rug. We know there's a clear connection, obviously, with the liver. I wrote a book about it, but with your brain health and cardiac and your weight, we hear about it every day, right? And so every article you open the newspaper, you can't pass an article about something about a food related to your health. But rarely does it really delve into mental health. So exactly. As we increase just thinking about mental health more for a variety of reasons in the past 12 months, I really think this is a conversation people are not only having, but want to know, okay, what can I do? I've had depression my entire life and I'm on medication, yes, but is there a dietary connection and things of that nature? So we have clear data. We have very good, strong scientific studies, both in animals and humans. And so I think it's time to really put mental health at the forefront, the way we have other health conditions related to nutrition.
Awesome. So what are the foods that, do you talk about macronutrients and mental health, or are we more talking about vitamins and minerals?
Well,
how do you
both.
break it down?
It really is both, right? So there are certain foods that are associated with mental health, looking at both depression and anxiety. One of the things that comes up a lot is omega-3 fatty acids. So obviously we could take an omega-3 supplement or we could eat fatty fish. There's been several studies looking at wild fish consumption and then supplemental use.
I'm sorry, let me just stop you. Somehow all of my phones are going off.
That's okay.
So I'm going to repeat that question. And
like Murphy's Law.
Yeah, I know. And they're all on vibrate, but that doesn't keep them from making noise.
Sure.
All right, I'll just turn them off. Okay. Okay. All right, so I'm going to rephrase that question and ask you again. Okay. So Kristin, let's start by talking about vitamins and minerals and their connection to mental health. What have you learned about that?
Yeah, so if we're going to look at vitamins and minerals, one of the big vitamins that's been associated with mental health is vitamin D. When we look at D deficiency throughout the United States, and clearly it's a problem, Carolyn. So I don't know where you are right now in the country, but a big chunk of people are not getting enough sun.
I always live in the sun, so I'm good.
And I live in Denver, so I'm good too. So
That's amazing. I just moved from Denver. I had a practice in Denver for 12 years.
really,
But even in my practice in Denver, when I tested people for vitamin D deficiency,
yeah.
Denver has more sunny days than California, where I live now. People are still deficient because they're not going outside as much.
Not going outside, or they're wearing sunscreen as they should, right? That blocks those UV rays. So we do have this deficiency for sure with vitamin D, and we have seen associations with D deficiency in both depression and anxiety. There was just a study, I believe it was in the last 2 or 3 months, that actually looked at individuals and D deficiency, and these were people that were considered clinically depressed, so there was an actual diagnosis to it. And so what we saw in the study was that supplementation of vitamin D did help with their depression levels.
Yeah.
Obviously, supplement is the way to go. You would have to eat so much salmon to get the vitamin D that you need. And it's in a form that the body, I always say, like when we eat food, it comes into our body, and we don't appreciate or understand all of the crazy stuff that happens behind the curtain to metabolize that food, right? We just think, oh, I'm going to eat it. It's going to come out the other end, and hopefully it's all going to be good.
Yeah.
Everything has to work perfectly. Every enzyme has to work. Every pathway has to work. And there's certain forms of food, or there's certain bioavailability of food that can impact that absorption. So
What about vitamin D and dairy products?
Even in vitamin D and dairy products, you're not going to have a huge amount of absorption because of the fact that we just don't absorb food sourced vitamin D very well. It's just not something we have. We don't have studies that really show that we were all wrong and we can all just go back to eating D-rich foods. The supplement is the key, but what I always tell my patients is go and get it tested. It's really important to know what your levels are, because then you can be dosed correctly. And I have so many patients that will either take some huge mega dose and maybe their D levels are only moderately low, or they're not taking enough and their D levels are like 9, they're in the tank, and they really need to be looking at more of a 50,000 international unit a week type of scenario. So
are you recommending vitamin D3, or are you recommending
D3? That's the only one that I would recommend.
Okay.
Is D3. And then obviously trying to get a good quality vitamin. That's always a question that people have. What's a good quality vitamin? Where can I find good quality vitamins, etc.? So I think you always want to go D3. Most of them have D3 at this point.
Yes.
You're also going to get D supplementation if you are a woman, especially, and taking calcium, because vitamin D is needed for the absorption of calcium. So you have to kind of figure that in. Okay, I'm getting this D supplement, but then I'm also getting this much D in my calcium supplementation. Oh yeah, and I'm also getting this D in my multivitamin. So D is a fat soluble vitamin. I always say from a mental health perspective that you should take your vitamin D and fish or a fish oil supplement together, because fat soluble vitamins need fat in order to absorb. It's not something we're going to take on an empty stomach or right before we go to bed. So you have to be a little bit strategic on the timing of when you take it. But I think knowing what your levels are before you kind of self-dose yourself is really important.
So one of the other things is that I know that certain people are more prone to being vitamin D deficient, particularly African Americans or people of color who don't absorb vitamin D through the skin. So that's something that people need to know. If you are African American, even Hispanic, and other ethnic races that have brown skin, they are not going to be absorbing the vitamin D as well.
Yeah, and that's a good point you make, Carolyn, because I think that for me, I'm half Dominican. So what I always look at is, okay, from the Hispanic side of things, where are things that I'm going to be more prone to developing? We always have to look at it. We have to look at where we came from, what our
genetic risk, and
what are our genetic risks? Because just as if there's no one diet that will fit everybody, there's no one supplement or one food that's going to meet every single person. That's the beauty of our world, is that we come from such diverse places. But it also makes us different, not in terms of how we look, but in terms of what we are more prone to develop over time.
Yeah. So besides vitamin D, what are some of the other vitamins that you're recommending that your patients take?
Yeah, omega-3 would be a great one. Now, you don't necessarily have to take omega-3 in a supplemental form. You definitely could have fatty fish. I always prefer, whenever possible, to have food over supplements, because I think that's the way the body intended for things to occur. Yeah. So vitamin D is obviously an outlier because sun is going to be the best option there. But a supplement for omega-3 or fatty fish, I would say fatty fish maybe twice a week. Salmon, trout, you want to try and focus on wild sources, not farmed sources, as much as possible. So that would be one option. If you're going to eat beef, then going with a grass-fed beef, that has a little bit more omega-3s as well. Yeah. And it's because obviously the cows are eating grass is coming from the soil, right? So we always, like, just as I had said, we don't think about what happens behind the curtains when we eat food. We also don't often think about the chain of what occurs in nutrients from animals, right?
Yeah, so, and I understand that it's not just grass-fed, but it's also grass-finished beef.
Grass-finished is a new big one.
So grass-fed and finished, it gives you almost as many omega-3s as fatty fish.
It gives you a lot. You know, depending on what study you're going to look at, it depends on what the comparison is. Is the fish farmed? Is it wild? You know, salmon are not born with omega-3 coursing through their veins. They are eating algae, and so algae is what causes them to build up that omega-3. I also think the sources. People often ask me about the sources. So there's DHA and EPA, and then there's ALA. ALA is a plant-based form of omega-3. So you find that in walnuts, you find it in canola oil, you find it in flaxseed. And that ALA, though it's great, it's wonderful, it does have to be converted to EPA and DHA in order for the body to understand it and absorb it. So again, if you are at home, you're watching this and you're thinking, well, I'm a little bit depressed, and I'm thinking, okay, what do I do with this right now? But I'm also vegan. This does not mean that it's like, okay, well, there's nothing you can do about it, right? There's plenty of vegan omega-3 supplements, plenty of plant-based forms of omega-3 that you can consume. So there's always options out there.
Yeah. So what about the B vitamins?
B vitamins are another one. So one of the B vitamins that I always talk about is folate. Folate, you know, it depends again on what's going on kind of in your genetic profile. So for example, I have some patients that have what's called an MTHFR deficiency. I'm sure you've heard of this, Carolyn. And so it's really, at the clinic where I work, we really test it more than you would think. A lot of people have heard of it. They're interested in it. So when you have an MTHFR deficiency, what occurs is that when you eat foods that have folate, that folate cannot cross the blood-brain barrier without a methyl group. And MTHFR provides the methyl group. It's like the chaperone. So when you can't get folate to the brain, you tend to be more prone to brain fog, maybe to depression, but brain fog has the more, you know, studies and things of that nature. So that's one thing to look at, is kind of from a perspective of folate. Are you getting enough folate in your diet? All the B vitamins are important because they are our energy vitamins. Obviously, most people think of that as energy vitamins, but really kind of looking at this process of, okay, within the B vitamins, which we're going to get in lentils and whole grains and fruits and vegetables, so we're going to get it in really great sources, are there certain things that perhaps you could be looking at a more individual base, right? So again, for some of my patients, when I work with their physicians, we will put them on a methylated folate supplement. And now you have that chaperone that can now take folate up to the brain.
Awesome.
Right? So little things that we are learning through science every single day are things that I think are going to help to improve that.
And then B12.
Yeah, B12 as well. And you know, a lot of people don't know that when you age, you lose stomach acid. And so when you lose stomach acid, you lose the ability to absorb B12 really efficiently. So if you have a piece of chicken, let's say, that chicken has B12 attached to the protein. So you consume that chicken and then stomach acid goes in, detaches that B12 from the protein, and then you absorb B12, right? Most likely in the small intestine. So when you get older and you lose that stomach acid, you just don't have that ability. So B12 is actually a very hard deficiency to develop, because if you are not vegan, you're going to get probably enough of it every single day.
Because you're eating meat, right?
Not just meat, chicken, eggs, any animal product, anything that's an animal is going to carry B12 attached to that protein.
And what are plant sources of B12?
None.
None. Okay.
None.
So
no plant sources of B12. So that's why if you are a vegan, you absolutely need to take a B12 supplement.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we can test for B12 deficiency in the blood,
Yep.
which may or may not be as accurate as we'd want to see, for sure.
Yeah, you can test that. And then a lot of people, again, like my patients will have the conversation, and then the next question is, well, what should I take? Right? I'm a vegan. What should I take? So for me, I typically will recommend a sublingual under the tongue B12 supplementation, because especially for my older population, once you lose that stomach acid, you can actually start the enzyme activity and the absorption of it with saliva. So getting as much absorbed under the tongue before it even needs to enter the stomach is always a good idea.
Well, you mentioned the gut, and I know that's an important area of research regarding mood disorders.
Yeah.
So what can you tell us about gut health and mood?
Yeah, gut, this is a huge area of research, really huge. There's been so many studies. And so if we look at it very high level, we can look at two different areas of gut health. We can look at what you need to take out of your diet, and then we can look at what you need to put in.
Okay.
And it's always seems to be too simplistic of an answer, but it happens to be the most accurate one. If you are eating plenty of color, like a lot of times I talk to my patients about, like, instead of saying, hey, you need to eat more broccoli and more kale and more apples and this, I always encourage them to eat more color, because color in the plant world equates to more phytonutrients, more disease prevention, more anti-inflammatory benefits, etc. So from that perspective, if we look at some of the studies, diet may be one of the best predictors of gut health. There's other predictors, the method of which you were born and how your mother ate and whether you were breastfed. And, you know, back when I lived in Cleveland, we had goats, and I would let my kids walk around amongst the goats, and I'd have these moms be just disgusted because my kids were walking around the goats like, oh my God, these are filthy animals. And I had a pig. And I said, yeah, but you know what? These guys are they're building up their immunity like you would not believe. So even looking at when you were young, if your parents were just uber clean and we're constantly putting hand sanitizers on our kids, things like that, that might not be the best thing for our gut health. So all of those factors aside, getting enough fiber, getting enough antioxidants, getting fruits and vegetables, etc., we know plays a huge role in gut microbiota. We know probiotics play a big role, although there's not a ton of studies on probiotics related to mental health and guts, but there are definitely a few. So probiotics and prebiotics. And then we know elimination of things. So really, we just talked about red meat, but really taking out huge amounts of red meat, taking out processed meat, taking out sugar, taking out white refined grains, things like that we know also help with flourishing gut microbiota. So it really is a complete turnaround. So I always tell people, like, just like a multivitamin is not an insurance policy, you can't eat fast food every day, go home and pop a probiotic and think you're fine, right? So we have to look at all aspects of our diet and everything that we're doing in terms of, okay, how can I make my gut as healthy as possible? Because as we are learning, the gut is the second brain, and it plays such a predicting role in whether or not we will develop certain mental health conditions, whether or not we will develop certain health conditions, obesity, etc.
Yeah. So I know there aren't a lot of human studies on the gut and mood, but there are some animal studies, right?
There are, yeah. And there are some human studies on gut and mood, but just not always related to probiotics. So there's like diet related.
Yeah. So if someone isn't sure whether they have a good microbiome, how do they know? What do you tell them? How can they tell if they have a good microbiome?
Well, sometimes it's hard to tell, right? Just as if let's say, Carolyn, I'll use you an example. Let's say you had a sky high C-reactive protein, which is a marker of inflammation. You and I talking right now, there's no way I'd be able to tell if you have inflammation that's internal, right?
But there are some things that, like if your gut isn't functioning right, like if you're
absolutely
constipated or you have irritable bowel.
Yeah, irritable bowel, leaky guts. Those are all things that we know could be related.
A lot of gas or bloating. Any of those may be signs of your microbiome is not as healthy as it could be.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Gut issues can definitely be part of that. And as you know, we're talking about mental health. Gut issues can also be a sign of mental health that is not being treated, right?
Yeah, right.
So that could be another thing. A lot of times I'll have my patients come to me. We've done every test. We've looked at everything. They're still having these gut issues, a lot of IBS, and they actually do better with our mental health counselors than they do with me, because ultimately the change had to be in the brain and not the diet.
Yes, exactly. Are there other factors that are nutritional that affect mood that we haven't talked about?
I think like obviously we could always touch on alcohol. And looking at alcohol consumption. Now, and I'm not talking about excess alcohol, but looking at the I always think, again, if we look kind of more high level, and I'm a mom, so I'm biased to looking at other moms that I'm around. And we have this really bad saying, in my opinion, and it's like mommy's little secret, where all these moms are going home after they pick up the kids and having 2 or 3 glasses of wine at 5 o'clock because they're just stressed and they need to de-stress, and I don't know how to do it. And I see that in some of the moms that I hang out with sometimes. So, that is a huge, even though alcohol is a sedative, it is a huge sleep disruptor. And we know that there are things that can happen with the gut as well with a lack of sleep. So I think just looking at the connection of food and sleep, which again, we don't look at a lot of times, that would be another big one. So you're going to bed, you're passing out, but then 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. you wake up and you're not going back to bed. So looking at cleaning up the diet, oftentimes cleaning up the diet means, okay, let's look at how are you consuming alcohol, or what are you drinking throughout the day? We always think diet, we think food, we don't think of what are we drinking, right? So what are you drinking throughout the day? Are you drinking sports drinks? Are you, what are you drinking? One of the best drinks you can have is coffee, for example, and there's a myth that coffee's awful for you. So just really kind of looking.
Coffee thing kind of goes back and forth. One week it's good for you, and the next week it's bad for you. So I don't know where it is right now, but
it's good. It's good. Yeah. Coffee, and you can you can do this with any food, but you can get really nitty gritty with coffee. You can look at, okay, I just want to have organic options of coffee and I want fair trade. And you can look at all those things. Right. But I think really what it truly boils down to is getting more fruits and vegetables, more fiber, right? A lot of times I won't say more whole grains because it scares a lot of my patients, especially ones that want to stay low carb. So just looking at that low carb, looking at that low carb options, you can still eat low carb and have high fiber vegetables, for example. So things like that, things that have a lot of fiber, that always makes a big difference, I think.
Okay. So if people are,
did I lose her?
No. Can you hear me? Kristin? Hello? Hello?
Are you still there, Carolyn?
Yeah, I can hear you.
You there, Carolyn?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Sorry, I thought I lost you.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, I don't know what happened there.
I had a call come in and it went to my computer, so.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. I don't know how to stop that. I'm not tech advanced.
Luckily, I have a good editor, so we're in good shape.
Okay, good.
All right, So if people are just starting out and say they have been diagnosed with depression or
Mhm.
anxiety, where do you recommend that they get started? Like, what's the first thing that they can do? Because
Yeah.
we talked about a lot of things, and it could seem overwhelming, for people to.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, my experience, I will always tie back to the Meadows, just because I've seen thousands and thousands of people be helped there, and I know the process that what they do works. Um, let's say I'm here in Denver and someone doesn't want to travel there, though. I mean, I think the simple answer is to, number one, talk to somebody. So it might not start with being a mental health professional. Sometimes just talking to someone and kind of getting resources from that person can sometimes help. I've seen that. I've seen people that have come to me just as patients, and they come to me to talk about their diet, but they end up crying in the middle of the conversation, and they tell me something about their marriage, or they tell me that perhaps they're an alcoholic. So I think that just being able to open up to someone who you trust that can help you find resources, I think is really a big one. I think asking your physician, a lot of times, we all should have a primary care physician. And I'm so biased because I'm from Cleveland Clinic, and, we all have to have primary care physicians there, and there's a good reason for that. But I think maybe giving a call to your primary care physician, or if you're a woman, your gynecologist, and just really kind of looking at, okay, I think this is going on. Do you have any resources for me? I think just taking the first step, though, from what I've seen, and this is obviously, not as strong of a expertise that I have as I do in diet, but from what I've seen that's worked, just reaching out for assistance, typically you'll end up getting to some place where you can get help, where you can figure out what's going on and how to remedy it.
Yeah. So if people wanted to start, say, for example, with the vitamins, would you recommend that they need to talk to their doctors first, or?
Yeah, I would. I mean, when you look at diets, and you look at vitamins and minerals and supplements and things like that, what we do know is very clear is that if you're looking at a mental health condition, treatment with a mental health expert is going to be your primary goal, right? That has to be what you're doing. And then your dietary measures will be in conjunction with that. One of the foods we didn't talk about, for example, is chocolate. And so there's been several studies looking at dark chocolate and how dark chocolate reduces subjective stress. I would never tell someone who is stressed out, why don't you just go home and eat some chocolate and see if that works, right? I would probably say, okay, well, let's meet with our mind-body coaches and let's talk to someone who's an expert here that knows how to get you started with some meditation techniques. And let's see if that's really what's going on, or if there's something more of a deeper issue. So diet is always going to be in conjunction with whatever your psychologist or psychiatrist or therapist, whoever you're seeing, whatever modality of treatment they have you through. Diet is not going to reverse depression, but it will definitely help if you are getting treatment for clinical depression.
So sometimes when people are depressed, they turn to comfort foods to
Sure.
self-medicate. And I know you have this book, the Fatty Liver book, and I'm wondering what your views are on sugar and mood and how those two tie together.
Yeah, well, we know that sugar causes problems from all ends. So whether it's mental health or reduces or increases your risk rather for heart disease or things of that nature, or gut microbiota. If you think there's something bad that can happen in your body and sugar might play a role, sugar probably plays a role, right? Now, we can have a little bit of sugar and be okay, but it's really, in the studies that we look at, it's really looking at excess sugar and how that factors into it as well. So I think, I do think there's always debate around this. So Carolyn, just as you said, there's always debate about coffee. There's always debate as to whether sugar is an addictive substance.
Yes.
But I do think that we have plenty of scientific data. Some of it is just in animals, but scientific data looking at how sugar is very hard to come off of. And so when you look at that quality of any kind of food, and alcohol is a great example of that, obviously, that is something that is addictive, right? So I could probably stop eating black beans today and not have any real effect. But when people come off of sugar, they have a very large effect and they want to go back to it. The cravings are still there. So I think sugar is a really big problem. We are kidding ourselves as Americans if we feel that we have solved it because we have all these great low sugar options now. Sugar tastes great, and sugar makes you feel great temporarily because it increases your blood sugar and it increases feel-good hormones. So serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine. There is a neurotransmitter impact that we know is associated with certain foods, but it's a very it's a brief moment in how we're feeling, and so it's not going to help us long term. But I also appreciate for anyone that walks into my office or does a counseling session with me how very difficult it is to get it out of your diet.
Yeah. Because it's almost in everything. It's
almost in everything. I think that's one of the reasons why people have really embraced and are just obsessed with the ketogenic diet right now, because there's no sugar you can have. I mean, you got about 4% of your calories are coming from carbohydrate. So when that's the case, there's just no sugar whatsoever. So yeah, sugar's a tough one, but the longer you can go without it, the easier it is to not have it. And eventually you just don't really think about it anymore, and maybe you're not craving it anymore. There's also some studies looking at cravings and fasting. So fasting is also incredibly popular right now. And so when we look at some of the different forms of fasting that people can do, we know, or I could tell you anecdotally from some of my patients, they've gone on fasting regimens and just kind of eliminating sugar during the days that they're fasting. They get out of that fasting state and they're just like, I thought I would go and grab a candy bar, but I'm just not interested, right? So
I think that does work for some people. I come from an eating disorder background, so any kind of food restriction is a problem because it sets people up for overeating or binging.
Sure.
And some of the studies show that when we demonize food, and that's what I worry about when we talk about sugar, when we demonize certain foods, it just makes it more attractive to people because they think, I can't have it, but I really want it.
Right.
And, it sets up that dynamic.
Yeah.
There have been animal studies too that have shown that intermittent restriction and offering sugar, so depriving the animals of sugar, then offering them sugar, is the very thing that sets up the addiction component.
Yeah.
That if they have free access, they're not as likely to get addicted as if they go back and forth.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you see patients who really struggle with binge eating and, how that restrictive component can lead to the next binge.
Yeah. Oh, I definitely do. I have a lot more binge eating patients in my practice than I ever would like anorexia or things like that. So I typically see it on the other end. And I couldn't agree with you more. I was just presenting over the weekend and someone said, well, can you list the top 5 bad foods? Like, what's on your bad food list?
Yeah.
And my answer was, I don't have a list like that.
Yeah.
Because, tonight I am going to go out with my family. I was in Washington, D.C. We're going to have a nice dinner, and I might have a cheeseburger and get ice cream after, right? And that's not going to be every day. So, I agree with you that when we look at kind of foods that we simply can't have because they're bad, or they'll make us fat, or they'll make us sick, whatever the case may be, if you look at studies, it's always frequency that's associated with it. No one has died from having a piece of licorice, right? Yeah. So, and you're right, Carolyn, you're much more of a mental health expert, so you would know this more than me, but I agree with you there. It works for some people. It doesn't work for everybody. So,
well, I think the fad diets are the thing that I struggle with, because so many patients with eating disorders think, oh, well, I heard, X and Y experts say, do this diet or do this.
Right.
And, it's great it's great to experiment with nutrition if you don't have an eating disorder. But for the person who has the eating disorder, all of these fad diets just or it can be the death of them. It's just
Yeah.
so hard. It can set them up for trigger eating disorders and then perpetuate eating disorders.
Yeah. And I think actually as a culture, we need to take the word diet and dieting out of our vocabulary, because really it goes back to the basics. If you eat real food and you don't eat too much of it, I mean, all you need to do is look at the blue zones.
Yeah.
Right? If you look at the blue zones, these people are not going on diets. They are not going to the grocery store for the most part. Most of them are not taking supplements. They're living longer and better than the rest of the world. So I think, like, yes, the goal has to be we should manage our weight and we want to live longer, but we also want to live better. We are currently in 2018, we're living longer than we ever have, but our quality of life has not caught up with that.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So I think from that perspective, we really have to think not just, okay, I want to live as long as possible and I want to fit into a size 6 jeans, right? That's a recipe for failure. We have to think, I want to live really well and I want to be comfortable in my skin and what's going to be natural for me.
Yeah. And I want to compress my mortality, my morbidity to the end of my life. So in other words, be healthy for longer before you die, rather than going into your older age being debilitated with arthritis and diabetes and all of these other.
Right, absolutely. But as you know, youth is wasted on the young.
I know. I sure wish I could go back about 20 years.
Right.
I'm not asking for too much. I don't want to go back 40 years, just 20.
Yeah.
So do you have any last minute words of advice for anyone who's interested in this topic, food and mood, any resources or how they can
I would say, if you're someone that is watching and you are suffering from any kind of mental health, anything. So whether that's anxiety or depression or it's, something worse, I would just kind of reiterate the appreciation you have to have for a healthy diet that has a really high nutrient density. But to your point, Carolyn, and it's a great point, to also know that on a Friday night, you can go and have ice cream and a cheeseburger, right? So just to kind of look at things in moderation. I think when we look at restriction and we look at good versus bad, and we look at what's the latest fad, all the points that we talked about today, those are all things that haven't worked. We don't stay on those things, which is why we continue to be a sick and obese nation. So really, it's really about going back to the basics. It's about eating real food and trying to really, we didn't talk about this aspect as much, but trying to really assess your hunger, right? So if we think of our diet as a fueling mechanism, because that's what it is, yes, we would never sit there and pump up the gas in our car. And once it, we hear that click, be like, I think I'm going to put a little bit more in, right? We'd never do that, but we do it all the time when we eat. So really trying to eat slower, chew more, be more mindful when you eat. Don't read the paper. Don't be looking at your phone or the TV. Be mindful when you are eating, slow it down, and stop eating when you no longer feel hunger. Don't stop eating when you're full. And that's a really hard thing to do. But once we've gotten to fullness, we have completely overfueled. And so that's one way to think about it as well.
Yeah. Well, I just want to thank you for, again, being on the show.
Thank you.
If anyone wants to reach you or find your book, how do they do that?
They can go to my website, which is www.Kristin, spelled with an I, KristinKirkpatrick.com.
Okay. Thank you again.
Thank you, Carolyn.
All right.